This is Long Live the Queen, a Wisteria podcast. I'm your host, Dorian LeBlanc. Some time ago, we interviewed famed game designer Mark Hart, creator of Wisteria's Possibility Engine. To date, that episode has generated more requests to invite our guest back than any other by far. Unfortunately, Dr. Hart was unable to make more time for us, but his team has given us permission to share some additional conversation from our time together. We'll play that segment for you now. So, Mark, we'd love to hear more about your unique, or at least very unusual, position in that Reiner Bauza is, in-game, what's known as a singleton. You are, as far as we're aware, the only player with access to that character. I wonder if you'd like to tell us something about how that came about, and maybe how it changes your experience of being in Wisteria.
So I am the gatekeeper for that character. So I don't play it completely exclusively. I do occasionally allow my grad students to pilot it from time to time. In fact, on Reiner Bauza's schedule right now is a rules committee meeting for the Royal Ballistica Club, and one of my grad students is covering that meeting. I've got to imagine that what for you is an opportunity to get out of a meeting or some such thing has got to be for your grad student the experience of a lifetime.
Well, maybe not in this case. Ballistica has enough of a following now that they kind of want to be self-governing. So mostly my role there is to rubber stamp whatever they decide, which is less exciting. Now, I do allow them to do a lot of the collusion work on new variants and mods for collusion for the Duke. So a lot of that at this point is my grad students, and they do run playtests and do other sort of design functions. That's and it's all part of the learning, and all part of the research too.
Got it. That's wonderful. Now, obviously, all of us in MeatSpace can watch, the various feeds that come from Wisteria itself so that we can follow along with what's happening in the world, even if we're not embedded in it in the moment. And I can imagine, given your ties to Diana Whalen and Harrison Kelly, that you may have some special access that the rest of us mere peons don't, maybe particularly around the playing of your games. Now, I don't want to get into anything that you're not allowed to talk about, but I'll just ask flatly if there are any particular moments that you've witnessed of people playing any of your games that you find especially noteworthy, especially amusing, maybe surprising. I just wonder if you have any stories for us about some of the game that you've seen.
Well, when you design a game and what we think of as completing a game design, right? Like you've got a game and it's in the metaphorical box. That's really just the starting point, right? Like it's up to the audience, which is to say, the players and the culture and the society to decide sort of like where they want to take that game, right? And 9 times out of 10 where they want to take it is the trash bin. Right. But so it's always fascinating to sort of see what, sort of what the world does with your creation. And that's part of the creation itself. Right. Like, in some sense, like the frame of the Mona Lisa includes the entire Louvre. Right. Right. And so, so like in the case of Ballistica, we have, it's pretty much out of my hands now. It's got its own governing body. I have an advisory role, but it's mostly, it's got its own internal politics and all that stuff, in the actual sort of evolution of the design of that game. And, I spend a lot of time watching. Now, the meta for, Masquerade, it's kind of fascinating to see how it's been evolving, because it gets played both inside and outside Wisteria. And the buzz, probably most people listening aren't big into the Masquerade scene, but there was a thing that happened very recently at a tournament with Baron Barleychrome, where in the final round of the tournament, he
disguised all of his pieces as themselves and was essentially playing straight chess. Now, Masquerade is basically chess where every piece is really another piece in disguise, and he decided to subvert that. And I mean, and so now everyone's talking about like the Barlachrome as being sort of like a new island in the strategic archipelago of that game. And it's really a crazy feat because it's kind of like imagine playing rock, paper, scissors with someone and playing rock like 9 times in a row, right? And they're so bamboozled that when you play rock the 10th time, they're not ready for it. Like that's kind of the feat that that Baron Barlachrome pulled off in this final round game of Masquerade. So it's fascinating.
It's funny you should mention that. I was hoping to interview Barlachrome for this reason, because I remember that a lot of the discussion around that gambit was the notion that his opponent assumed was happening, that there were a pair of pieces on the board whose identity were in fact swapped.
Right.
And
yeah, I mean,
right,
the common one is what's called in Meat Space. It's called the drag show, which is you disguise your king as your queen and your queen as your king, right? And that's like a very common sort of like little gambit, because of course that gives your king all of the power of a queen, and the king is basically a throwaway piece in normally in Masquerade. But so part of the gambit, right, is you have to play like your king as a throwaway piece, and you have to intimate that pieces are disguised as other things when they in fact aren't. You have to make this knight look like a queen, look like it's maybe secretly checking something or secretly angling to do something else that it isn't, when in fact it's just doing what it's doing. So he wasn't actually playing straight chess. He was playing this bluff around this particular setup. So
what seems like an easily reproducible gambit is in fact nothing of the kind, because you have to, as you say, right, there's 2 levels to the bluff, right? You're not just playing straight chess, but rather you're
Right. And it'll be interesting to see whether, for example, people start using their unmasking moves to, unmask the king, take the king mask off to see if, to check to make sure that the king isn't hiding underneath the king, if you will. It'll be interesting to see if that happens. But I'm watching the Masquerade meta with sort of bated breath, both from Meat Space and as Bauza.
Oh, that's great. And since you've, in some sense, generally, I should say very generously, given those of us who play and those of us who watch, some ownership of the experience, right? In the way that you're talking about it, right? You're the game designer, you've set things off, and yet now it's sort of owned by the world in some sense, and all of the people who are in it. I was going to ask what of your work within Wisteria you're proudest of, but maybe it would be better to ask, what experiences you've had within Wisteria, or what things you've seen in Wisteria that you find most interesting, independent of your relationship, to those experiences.
Well, I mean, right now it's the Masquerade meta. Although I'm definitely interested in seeing how Ballisca tastes off. We're seeing I was in a random bar and I got invited to play Collusion. By
someone who knew who you were?
No, by someone who didn't know anything about who I was. And so I actually played dumb and had them explain the rules to me. Which was good because they were playing some house rules that I may have actually borrowed for one of the Duke's parties. But that was a very, I got to be a little bit incognito there. And that was a very gratifying experience.
That's fun.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
And here's the thing, though. People always assume that the designer of the game is going to be good at playing it. And that's quite frequently not true. And the reason is because the designer is playing the game that they think they made. Right? And the players are actually, the designer is playing the game that they were trying to make.
Yeah.
Right? And failed, probably. Right? They might have created something good in the process, but like what's in their head and what's actually, out there in the world is probably a little different. And they're playing that game, whereas the players, they have nothing else. They're playing the actual game as it is. And so, I did not last long in that particular game of collusion, but it was fun.
But it sounds like you had a good time anyway. Yeah. That really brings me back to some of our earlier conversation about Harrison Kelly, but maybe I'll just leave it there. I do have a question from the feed here that came in. This is an interesting one. The question asks, a number of attempts to replicate the possibility engine's core functionality have failed, right? And some have claimed that the underlying theory is untenable, calling it the impossibility engine, which I'm sure you've heard before. Would you comment on the difficulties other researchers have had, or on your presumed, the writer says, ability to surmount those challenges?
Well, that's a little spicy. All right, so look, if you look at the white paper for the possibility engine, right, or if you look at even the patent application, right, those are early iterations of the technology, right? And so if you use that as your cookbook, you're gonna be disappointed. And by the way, that patent, most of the claims in that patent application have not been upheld. There's a couple like edge casey cryptographic application claims that are still upheld, but yeah, that the actual sort of secret sauce, if you will, came later. And, I wanted to do a second patent application, but, Bon Anders thought it would be better to keep it proprietary within the Wisteria company. And, so he made me the deal of a lifetime, if you will. And I sort of had to weigh the opportunities that deal created against the possibility of the possibility engine finding its way into more things. But there's some innovation left for the world to do outside of the Wisteria Corporation to actually catch up with what's going on in there. And I encourage the researchers to keep at it. And I will no doubt hear about their success sometime in the next century.
Left is an exercise for the greater, it sounds like.
Yeah,
okay,
much.
That makes sense. Yeah. It's interesting you should talk about the opportunities it's afforded you. One imagines that your career as an academic is at least in part made possible by the deal you were referring to with COO Bon Anders. In some sense, whatever lockdown the possibility engine is on has unlocked a lifetime of research that you can do at Berkeley, where you are with your grad students. Are there any other topics of research in the pipeline that that you're able to talk about publicly, or maybe some ideas that you haven't yet come to, but that you have some interest in and that you'd like to discuss?
Bauza's he's got some things in the pipe. And, again, it's all about sort of trying to sort of replicate a counterfactual, right? It's all about, how do things go there that are different from how they went here. And there's a little bit of, hindsight because, of course, Wisteria's technology level is not ours. Game design has benefited from in many indirect ways from 100 years of technology. And so some of it is like sort of bringing those learnings, back to a place from before they could have been learned. in some sense. And so yeah, so Bauza's working on a worker placement game that it doesn't have a name yet, but hopefully he'll work the kinks out of it and be happy with it. And we're messing around with croquet. We're kind of giving croquet the ballistica treatment. And and some of it is, of course, we are playing to our audience, right? So it's much easier to get play tests when you have the interest of the aristocracy than when you are just showing up in bars trying to get random folks to play your new drinking game or whatever.
Sure. And what about playing to an audience of one? What are some games that you still play? I'm curious to know if you still play Dungeons and Dragons, if the old school board games still hold interest for you, if your grad students, go out drinking on Friday night and play Collusion in a corner of a bar somewhere.
There's a little bit of that going on, definitely. There's some RPGs. I'm actually more of a Champions player myself, also pretty old school. But yeah, though that's a harder sell.
That's a superhero game from the 1960s, 19 something.
Yeah, 1980s. Yeah.
1980s.
So
okay.
I mean, what it really is it's like a programming language for describing superheroes. So you can pretty much instantiate any fictional genre you like, because superheroes can do anything, right? They can be wizards, They can be, tech users, they can be, and so like you can put your own design constraints on that, right, and then have any genre you want. So that's what I love about it.
A game designer's game.
Yeah, it's kind of a game designer's game. Yeah, so there's a little bit of that going on.
And the rumor is you're a pretty solid hand at Go as well, no?
Solid. I have whenever I get out to Taipei or Seoul, I'll find a parlor and get trounced by like the locals, but they're always amused to see me there. And,
do they recognize you there? Do they know who you are?
I haven't actually made any repeat visits to the same salon yet, but I don't know that will happen. We'll see.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. That's great.
And they certainly haven't recognized me for, as, for my other reputation, as a game designer or anything.
Yeah. So it sounds like you really get to bounce around a lot. You're spending time as Reiner Bauza, of course. You're spending time, as Professor Hart, right? Running the research that you're doing. That sounds great. Do you find that it takes away from your ability to relax and unwind? Having your work be something that's so deeply recreational?
Well, yes. I mean, that's any creative will tell you that in any medium will tell you that that's a sacrifice that you make, right? If you're a filmmaker, then you can't watch a movie without, checking the top of the frame for the boom dipping down, right? Like if you're if you're a writer, then you're constantly critiquing or admiring the wordsmithing of what's on the page before you. And, if you're a game designer, you're kind of, we talked a little bit about connoisseurship earlier, but you're always sort of like looking at it through multiple lenses, both at the craftsmanship. There's actually a concept we talk about in game design called inoculation, which is, sort of elder gamers may be inoculated to concepts and mechanics that are still new to new players, right? Like, I don't, the obvious one is like, once you've played tic-tac-toe and kind of figured it out, right? You've played tic-tac-toe and figured it out. But to a little kid, it's still exciting. And, how many hundreds of games of rock, paper, scissors can you play before you kind of get what rock, paper, scissors is? But that doesn't mean that, someone else might still enjoy it. So one of the things that you have to do as a game designer is you kind of have to constantly be guarding against your own tastes in a funny way. Like you're, guarding against your own inoculation and what
the game that you don't have to, like, if you make a game designer's game every time, like, you're going to have a very small audience, right? It's okay to do that once in a while, but I'm much more interested in, again, how the culture is going to take what you do, and take it to where they need to take it. And, if every time where they need to take it is the trash bin, then that's not so good.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What's interesting to the expert and what's interesting to the casual player can be really radically different. That makes a lot of sense. I'm wondering. We touched in the main part of the interview. We touched on Bauza as a singleton, Bauza, and I'm sure that a lot of the work that you do in Wisteria, for designing games, is solitary work, or at least work done with a small team. But I've got to imagine, that Bauza is still out in the world, like even in, a game designer's got to eat, which means you've got to visit the bar or whatever. I wonder, do you have an awareness maybe that the rest of us lack, right? Are you aware of the workings of the possibility engine in the characters that you interact with in game? Like, do you have that sense that these people are in some sense aggregate personalities, or, is that an aspect of the boom coming in from the top of the frame for you? Or, is it just seamless even to you?
It's pretty seamless. I think there are moments, certainly, there are moments after the fact where you're kind of like, thinking about, you're in meat space, you're thinking about, what was happening the other day, and you're like, hey, wait a minute. And there are like little moments like that. Why didn't they? And then you realize that, the they is actually not singular, it's plural. There are moments, there are individual moments, but certainly nothing in the moment. Like, I don't have recollections of Bauza thinking that.
Got it.
Right.
Yeah.
I do have I am occasionally like, oh, this makes much more sense in the context of, of the sort of aggregation that's going on. But
coming back to the question of recreation, I guess it's good news that you're not seeing any of the, slight flaws while you're playing the game, that you still get the full experience, even knowing some of how the magic is created. That's really good news.
Well, I haven't actually played much as a non-singleton, right? So, like, I don't actually, I'm also an only child, so I don't actually know what it's like to have siblings, and I don't really understand the experience that, like, how the experience that other players have is different, or if it is, right?
Yeah.
And how much can any of us know about, what any of us brings back from Wisteria, right? I mean,
I guess that's part of the point. Mark, I know that you're as busy as a man can be, but I really appreciate your sticking around the studio a little extra to chat with me now that we have the interview in the can. Thanks for doing that.
It was great.
It's fascinating to hear these experiences. Thanks so much for coming by.
Long live the Queen. Long live my royalties.